In the words of George Washington, if you want peace, prepare for war. Today, concern about an armed confrontation between the United States and China is growing. US President-elect Donald Trump has made it clear that the United States should not be bound by the One China policy unless as part of a grand bargain of sorts. China, meanwhile, has warned that if that policy is compromised or disrupted, bilateral cooperation in major fields would be out of the question. And if veteran journalist John Pilger's words are anything to go by, a major US military build-up, including nuclear weapons, is underway in Asia and the Pacific with the purpose of confronting China. In fact, Pilger raises the alarm on an underreported and dangerous provocation. He says nuclear war is no longer a shadow, but a contingency when it comes to US and China. I'm Sana Khan. Tonight on Gravitas, we delve deeper, talk to experts about the likelihood of a full-blown war between China and the United States. Why does the US want war militarily? Where do these countries stand? And much more. Joining me this evening is Mr. M.K. Bhadrakumar, former ambassador to Turkey. Also, Atul Aneja, China correspondent from The Hindu. Mr. Utsav Chakrabarti, observer of the US relation with South and East Asia, Washington, D.C. And Mr. Jaydev Ranade, former additional Secretary Government of India. Thanks all of you for joining me this evening. First of all, let's have a look at this report. This is as provocative as it gets. The coming war in China screams the headlines, and the accompanying text warns that a major US military buildup, including nuclear weapons, is underway in the Asia-Pacific with the purpose of confronting China. Take a look.
Journalist John Pilger says the United States is spoiling for a fight with China. Pilger, who says he has spent 2 years making a documentary film on the subject, calls it the greatest buildup of American-led military forces since the Second World War. He warns that a nuclear war is no longer a shadow, but a contingency. Pilger argues that the rise of China as an economic power is seen as a threat to U.S. supremacy. Therefore, the U.S. must confront those that challenge American dominance. China's aggressive claims in the South China Sea undercuts long-standing alliances in Southeast Asia. Pilger writes that India is among those countries that are helping the American cause, although specifics are lacking. He believes that dividing societies in order to control them is a long-standing U.S. policy, as the tragedies in Iraq and Syria demonstrate. Some might be tempted to dismiss the article as alarmist or lacking rigor of analysis, but it cites academics and foreign policy watchers who are certain that the great game is well and truly on. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, let me first start by asking Mr. M.K. Bhadrakumar. Thanks, sir, first of all, so much for joining us this evening. After seeing this report, your initial thoughts, the report talks about a major U.S. military buildup, including nuclear weapons in Asia and the Pacific region, with the sole aim of targeting China. Your thoughts?
Well, I presume that the reference is to the rebalanced strategy of the United States. This is not hot news. You know, this is first spoken about by Hillary Clinton, then State Secretary, in 2010 in an article in the Foreign Affairs magazine. That's where she unveiled this idea. And then the idea is that some 60% of the American forces would be transferred to the Asia-Pacific region. So there is nothing really by way of a hot news, breaking news here. We must understand that. And this strategy had several dimensions to it. One of the, all of them, the common thread is to tackle China's rise.
Right.
To force China to negotiate on terms that are in the interest of the United States. It's about negotiating with China, even under Barack Obama. It will be more so in the case of Donald Trump.
Okay.
Because one of the solid pillars of this strategy, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, without which it will be very difficult to rally the countries of the region. You know, any war of this dimension will need an alliance system.
Right.
It's imperative. Europe is in disarray. Its economy is in trouble. It has absolutely no interest in going and fighting wars in faraway lands. Where are the allies for the United States in this kind of a war? So let's not talk about the war here.
Okay.
We are talking about a containment strategy and how effective that containment strategy has been in this period from 2010 to 2016, when the United States is going to have a new leadership.
Right.
Now, one of the statements that has been made by Donald Trump is that one of the first things that he's going to do after stepping into the Oval Office would be to tear up the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, that will put a hole into the rebalance strategy through which an elephant can pass. I'm not referring to India.
Right.
Literally, an elephant can pass, in the sense the rebalance strategy is in tatters. So we are discussing something in terms of the second term of Barack Obama's presidency.
Right.
Now,
okay.
Objectively, you can now discuss this strategy, how viable it is.
I'm going to talk to you more about that, but looking at this report, Mr. Atul Aneja, if I can come to you, more than 400 American military bases are encircling China at this point in time, with missile bombers, warships and nuclear weapons. Now, China is, it's sort of a perfect news, as this report says. How do you see the situation? Is there not a looming threat of a war then between US and China, or this is something that's been played out of proportion here? What are your thoughts?
I think that is a very far-fetched assumption that the China and the US are heading towards a war, and that too a nuclear war. I completely agree with what Ambassador Bhadra Kumar has said, that, what John Pilger and others are saying is really the rebalance strategy, or the Asia pivot, or pivot to Asia, started by Hillary Clinton and then, so-called Obama doctrine. So there is nothing new about it. And frankly, to counter that, the Chinese have their own deterrent. They may not have offensive capacity, but they have their DF-5 and DF-31 ICBMs, and you have now DF-41 being developed. So, there is enough, and plus the Chinese have developed submarine-launched ballistic missiles as well, the JL-12 missiles. So, the Chinese have enough of a deterrent to sort of discourage any kind of a hot war.
Right.
So, I think the balance is fairly there now to prevent such a eventuality to take place. There are other aspects like a trade war, etc., which I think is something which Donald Trump might do because of his own domestic compulsions of creating more jobs in the United States, etc. So that's a different dimension. It takes off the alarmist and the war dimension, but it moves into the economic domain. I think that is where the state of play is going to be.
Okay.
In the coming months.
Okay, fair enough. Let me take in your opening comments, Mr. Chakrabarti, on this.
Yeah, I would largely agree with Mr. Aneja and Mr. Bhadra Kumar that we should not be alarmed by the sudden escalation, as somebody put it. This has been in the games for a while, and the Asia pivot has been in the games. Most likely what is going to happen after Mr. Trump takes office is that he's going to focus on the trade deficit and the intellectual property issues, and largely it is going to be an economic shadow boxing that's going to play out. And because TPP has been taken off the table, America will have to come up with newer ways to put together an alliance in the Pacific Rim region. India and Australia, obviously, along with Japan, would be playing a very important role in it. So I think that's the direction that we are going to head towards. Largely, the military shadow boxing is going to continue in terms of how both the countries place and remove and replace their assets in that region. But I do not think it's going to turn out to be a hot war anytime soon.
All right. In fact, but, we're going to talk more about this in just a bit. But Ambassador Bhadra Kumar, do you not agree that in the recent times, especially after the just concluded presidential elections, there's been this aggressive build-up of aggression between the US and China? If we talk about the drone incident, if we talk about the Taiwanese president's congratulatory call to Donald Trump. and media reports in China talking about advocating using force for reunification of Taiwan after Donald Trump had warned of hostilities towards Beijing. How do you see then, in terms of what we are talking today? Everybody seems to agree that nothing major, we can't talk about a war just yet. But what is this aggression? What would you attribute it to? What's the end point?
There is, not only in the minds of the Chinese, but in the minds of everyone, there is this known unknown. What we know is that Barack Obama and Donald Trump have very little in common in terms of their vision, in terms of even the mandate they have received.
That's right.
To get elected as a president. What is unknown is what Donald Trump is going to offer. Now, what we know there in this unknown are certain elements. He has said that his foreign policy is going to be pivoted on a single point agenda, which is America First. Logically, think about it. If it is America First, what did he mean? He meant the reconstruction of America. Not only the economy, the society, even if it has become a dysfunctional political system,
right.
Every way a rejuvenation of the United States so that it can play an active role commensurate with its power. Today, it is by far the strongest power on the planet, but is unable to get its way around. There are, of course, other factors in terms of globalization and so on, which are at work, and multipolarity and all that. But otherwise, the United States is unable to pull its weight because there is a problem which is unattended at home. And this mandate clearly brought it out, Middle America's protest vote and all that. So you see, here is a president coming for his first term, and his topmost priority will be to get a second term. So once he settles down in about 6 months to 1 year's time, he has about 1 year. And then after that, I can tell you, in the United States domestic politics, what will happen is the campaign will begin for his re-election bid.
Right, right.
Now there, the point is, it's very fresh in memory what he has promised. What he has promised is not a war with China. What he has promised is not this sort of wars in faraway lands which are of no consequence. So what are the things he has said? He has said America First. He has said that he has absolutely no interest in regime change agenda, that he is not going to go and intervene in theaters which are of no consequence unless United States interests are directly threatened. Now, China comes in that category, and we can discuss how it is, how US interests are affected by China's rise. Now, that is one thing. And then the final one is that he has absolutely no interest in carrying countries like South Korea, Japan on Uncle Sam's shoulders. He said, if we are looking after your interests, you better cough up money.
Right, right.
So you see, that is about the alliance system. Now, do you quite see a man rolling up his sleeves to get into a war with a country like China? Like Atul said, China is also not a pushover. And today, frankly, the United States is not even in a position to conquer Iran.
So get your point, the arguments that you put forward, quite valid. Mr. Atul Aneja, so we're talking about America First, but then China talks about one China policy. Now, if United States moves in and threatens China's sovereignty, what does China do? What is happening in the Chinese media if we talk about the Taiwan situation, or the recent news of the drone being captured? Can you shed some light onto that as well, please?
See, two things. One is regarding the Taiwan issue. And if you really carefully see Donald Trump's statement, I mean, he is hinting, in fact, saying so that there cannot be unqualified support for the one China policy, hinting at a deal with China as a bargaining chip, Taiwan as a bargaining chip. So basically, the motivation over there is also to strike a deal with China. But here comes his political immaturity, you may say, or insensitivity, because for China, Taiwan and one China is not something up for bargain. So it's misfired in this case. And quite certainly, and I don't think that is on Donald Trump's mind either, which is of supporting Taiwanese sovereignty. Because frankly, if Taiwan tries to declare the sovereignty, there is going to be, I mean, there's no way China can tolerate, and it can go to whatever length it takes to make sure that that is preserved. But I really don't think that is on the horizon, because this the greater import of Donald Trump's statement is that shall we strike a deal with China, and what should be terms of that deal? And again, that boils down to, frankly, whether it can create jobs, whether China so-called steals U.S. jobs or not. And so that's where the equation is going to be. From the Chinese point of view, the way they look at it is that the U.S. cannot afford to have a long-drawn trade war, because that's going to hurt American companies as well, because China is a huge market for American products. And frankly, in fact, today itself, I was talking to a professor in a university here. So his take was interesting. He said, in the end, Donald Trump wants jobs to be created, and American infrastructure is falling apart. So in the long term, and that long term is ill-defined, there is a strong possibility that Chinese companies will invest in infrastructure, because that's their expertise, and that will create more jobs in America. So, I mean, the Chinese are thinking this through, as Bhadran has said, that, there are many imponderables at this time, and Chinese are also looking at various scenarios.
Right.
But this is one interesting scenario which is coming through, that instead of a trade war, finally it can lead to China, because the go-out strategy of China is now fairly well developed after the Belt and the Road Initiative of President Xi Jinping. That can U.S. be a destination for this go-out China policy in terms of investment in China, which will create more jobs for Americans.
All right, Mr. Aneja, stick with us here on the show. Let's quickly go back and listen into what Donald Trump has been saying as far as China and trade ties with China are concerned. Let's play out that soundbite for our viewers.
One of the most important relationships we must improve, and we have to improve, is our relationship with China. The nation of China is responsible for almost half of America's trade deficit. China is not a market economy. They get a lot of help. And that's why we designate them as being a non-market economy. Big thing. They haven't played by the rules. And I know it's time that they're going to start. They're going to start. They've got to. We're all in this thing together, folks. We got to play by the rules, folks.
All right, in fact, let me quickly go across to Mr. Utsav Chakrabarti, and I'm going to take the same question with the other guests as well. Given such robust trade ties at this point between China and the U.S., we also know that, there's going to be huge economic damage in case these two countries decide to go to war. $1.2 trillion worth of U.S. debt at this point in time, which is the largest than any other country in the world at this point. Mr. Utsav Chakrabarti, what do you have to say as far as the trade between the two countries is concerned, and parallel talk of war as well?
Well, what you can see here is that Mr. Trump is trying to renegotiate and rejig the whole discussion between the two countries. He is always one of those people who feels that he can negotiate things from a position where he muddies the water and brings all the things back to the table. And I think that is what Mr. Trump is trying, whether his call to the discussion with the Taiwanese leader, whether his talk about putting sanctions on China, and whether all these things are basically to bring on the table new sets of ideas and negotiation tools with which he thinks, Mr. Trump thinks, that he can bring about a new way of looking at relationships with China. Now, regarding the trade and the debt, China owns $1.2 trillion worth of American debt. America has about $367 million worth of trade deficit with China.
Right.
So it is in both the countries' interest not to go to war with each other. China doesn't want an American economy to collapse because it owns half of the debt and it's never going to get it back. And at the same time, China thinks of America as a huge market for its own products, and its own economy is somewhat, even though it is slowly coming out of that dependency, but it is still somewhat dependent on America's buying power. At the same time, America also, yeah. So
got your point.
Yeah.
Ambassador Bhadra Kumar, your take.
Well, I entirely agree with what both the panels have, panelists and Mr. Chakrabarti has said. The issue is, one is interdependency. Interdependency, as you yourself rightly put it at the beginning, interdependency means that, you know, when you hurt the other side, the adversary, you're also hurting yourself because you're locked.
Right.
That is one thing. And here in this particular case, especially in the period since 2008, where we are just recovering, you know, from the financial crisis and so on, you will also bring the roof down on the world economy. So you see, there are no winners in this. This is the number one. But we must go beyond it, because I think Mr. Donald Trump has a serious agenda when he says that America first, in terms of rebuilding America. Where is the money going to come from? It's as simple as that. It cannot come from Europe today. Europe is not in a position. European Union might even 2017, I don't know whether it will survive through 2017. Saudi Arabia is in trouble. It's raising bond and all kinds of things. It's unable to balance its budget. Where is the money? Japan? No way. So it has to come from China. So I think what Mr. Chakravarti said is absolutely right. What we are seeing is a businessman's approach to the situation.
Right.
Of you know, really juggling everything together to re-engage.
Right.
And I am very sure that Chinese will welcome this, because from the Chinese point of view, this kind of an engagement with America, there is no ideology involved in this. That
there's nothing to gain, basically. Trump
there is nothing by way of an opprobrium there for China. China will be delighted. China will be delighted at this sort of a hard, tough negotiation, because it can only lead logically to one thing, which would be opening the way for more Chinese investments in American infrastructure, which is something which Chinese have been wanting
for a long time. Mr. Aneja, we spoke about the trade ties, so I'm going to move forward in this discussion. Let's have a look at what we are talking about this evening, the possibility of war, what could go into a U.S. attack on China. Now, John Pilger, we carry on what he said in his report, believes it would combine the diverse strengths of the U.S. military, a completely hypothetical situation that we're talking about, quoting John Pilger's report, and take full advantage of its worldwide network of bases and facilities, which U.S. has been steadily building for a while now. Also, nuclear weapons, he's not ruled them out as well. Take a look.
Washington's loudly voiced concerns over China dredging 7 artificial islands in the South China Sea, as well as militarizing them, have been well publicized. But it needs to be recalled that the US network of naval, air and missile bases and facilities form what is often described as the perfect noose around China. This map from the New Internationalist magazine says there are as many as 400 bases that encircle China. Some of these have nuclear missiles aimed at China, and they stretch from Afghanistan to Australia and into the South China Sea. They include Japan's Okinawa Island with 32 US military installations, and South Korea's Jeju Island 400 kilometers from China's commercial capital of Shanghai, which can accommodate aircraft carriers. Pilger's analysis warns of blinding attacks against Chinese anti-access facilities, meaning its artificial islands. It says land and sea-based missiles would be used, also anti-satellite weapons. In last year's Talisman Sabre drill, US naval ships rehearsed blocking the Malacca Straits to choke the flow of oil and gas from the Gulf to China. Others have called for planting mines in the South China Sea, as well as enforcing a naval blockade of China's eastern seaboard, its industrial heartland. Money for these adventures might not be lacking. A study by Brown University says that the US has spent a staggering $5 trillion in what is described as aggressive wars since 9/11. More telling is a Pentagon document, Law of War Manual, which says the United States has not accepted a treaty rule that prohibits the use of nuclear weapons per se, and thus nuclear weapons are lawful weapons for the United States. Bureau Report, WION.
Mr. Atul Aneja, coming to you, could going to war at this point, one of the arguments could go against China is that US and China both have their problems, have their own problems. China facing huge internal challenges, be it Taiwan, be it the huge South China Sea dispute, also the separatist movements in Tibet and Xinjiang. So, what would you say to the fact that China itself has so many internal issues at this point that one of the arguments could be, that to deal with the own problems instead of, looking at a war with the United States?
No, I see. I mean, it's absolutely clear that China is not looking for a war with the United States. No way. Because, the whole China story is really now is the development of the country, because now 2020 is the next target to create a moderately prosperous economy, and 2050 is the target to create an advanced economy. So the Chinese are absolutely focused on their own economic development, etc. So whatever happens in geopolitically or in foreign policy is meant to aid this core objective of theirs, which is to grow itself into a moderately prosperous economy by 2020, and also eliminate poverty by that level. So it's absolutely clear that the Chinese over here, it's certain that they are looking at their own economic development as their core objectives.
That's right. They will respond. They will respond only if an act of aggression.
So there is no way that they will go for a confrontation. Now the question is, even from the American point of view, with what your bureau report was saying about the possibility of using nukes, etc. Now, I don't see how the Americans will go into what was earlier during the Soviet and Cold War time, Soviet and the US times, what was called the mutually assured destruction, or MAD as an acronym, because the Chinese have the retaliatory capacity to do that. They've also developed specific weapons to target aircraft carriers. There are 5 aircraft carrier groups under the Pacific Command of the United States. So, I don't see how the Americans would be interested in war, and how does that support Mr. Trump's agenda, which we are discussing here, of creating more jobs. So I really see no logic for this deteriorating into a war, and that to a thermonuclear war. That doesn't seem to be happening. You are right when you said that there are internal issues, Xinjiang, etc. That is definitely very important, and that's where issues like the China-Pakistan economic corridor, stabilization of Afghanistan, the development of the belt and the road west of Pakistan towards Kazakhstan and Central Asia. Now, those are the issues which China is definitely concerned with. It is also very concerned with the one China policy, which you mentioned earlier.
Right.
So this is what is going to engage the Chinese mind right now. Rather
and not
than
a war, and not a war or
aggressive
retaliating
posture of
war.
going for a war
Right.
with the Americans. That's the last thing which they would want. It doesn't serve their core interest.
Right. Also, Ambassador Bhadra Kumar, now I would also be interested in asking you, how would Moscow be viewing the present situation at this point in time, looking at these statements being exchanged between the US and China?
You see, what is taking place is that Russia and China have drawn together, closer together than at any time in their history, and qualitatively the relationship is at its highest level. There is an extraordinarily high degree of coordination
Right.
in foreign policy stances, like the last Chinese veto in the United Nations Security Council on the Syrian question testifies to it. Now, having said that, neither side is wanting an alliance. Neither China nor Russia is wanting an alliance, a formal alliance. So a NATO of the East and things like the sort is absolutely a preposterous idea. What they're trying to do is they are pooling their resources and they are pushing back at the US. I'm speaking about the Barack Obama period.
Right.
There is going to be a sea change in the calculus, from January onward, because Trump has said about engaging Russia and making Russia a collaborative partner in certain theaters already, and he has shown disinterest in NATO and that sort of confrontation with Russia in Eurasia. So things are going to change, dramatically change.
Right.
Even if there is going to be resistance to Trump, it will change. Alchemy is changing, let's put it like that. But having said that, my close reading of the Russian thinking tells me that having come through fire in the latter half of the Barack Obama presidency, the Russians will not jettison this relationship. And a betterment of, in other words, a betterment of relationship, to answer your question, a betterment of relationship with the United States is not going to erode the entente with China.
Okay.
Because that is something that they have very carefully built up. They have tasted the advantage of it, and that it creates them simply at no cost a lot of strategic depth.
Right.
You know, so that is an asset for them, and they would like to preserve it. So, for example, there are common interests, very many common interests in the Asia-Pacific theater. For example, the missile defense systems deployment in South Korea and in Japan. Now, Japan-Russia summit meeting just took place last week, right. 15th and 16th of December, and Putin has made it very clear that, you know, I mean, the whole thing, the one message that is going to come out of it, Russia is not going to budge an inch on the territorial dispute of Kuril Islands unless Japan breaks out of the American orbit.
Right.
Which Japan is not going to do.
The
so you can see the bottom line.
Right. The Russians are very clear as to who they want to side with at this point in time. You very, you know, eloquently put that the way Russia may be looking at the situation. The closing comments very quickly about have Mr. Chakravarti 1 minute or less. How do you see things moving forward once Trump administration formally takes over in January vis-a-vis the ties with China?
Well, I still do feel that there might be a lot of military tension between China and the new Trump administration as well, because of what China is achieving. Mr. Aneja had said that, you know, China is focused economically on its 2020 and 2050 goals, but in doing that, it will challenge America militarily also at a local level. Its One Belt, One Road will challenge American interest in Central Asia and the Middle East. Its Pacific Ocean policies will challenge America, and America will provoke in return. So there will be a little bit of military posturing going on. And with the new Trump administration, Russia will be a big player. We have to see, as Mr. Bhadrakumar said, how it pans out. And there will be a rapprochement between America and Russia. And we have to see how it works out. All
right, gentlemen. So all of you in agreement that this report that we discussed this evening is a bit far-fetched at this point in time, and we'll really have to wait and watch how things shape up in the weeks and the months to come to get a clearer picture of where the China-US relationship is headed. Thank you, all of you, Mr. Atul Aneja, Mr. M.K. Bhadrakumar, Mr. Utsav Chakravarti, for joining me this evening on this show. We're taking a short break. News and updates follow in just a bit. We're going to be talking about what's happening with Fethullah Gulen in Turkey, the recent attack that we saw on the Russian envoy as well. Stay with us. We'll be back.